Everyone, welcome back for chapter 5. We are going to be talking about supply in chapter 5. We do test both supply and demand together. And we just talked about a lot of stuff with demand, like elasticity and the law of demand and so on and so forth. I want you to really try your best to set that aside for a moment as we move into supply, because we're going to be using a lot of similar terms, and I want to have really as little confusion as possible. So welcome to section 1. We'll get started here. So in section 1, we're going to talk about the law of supply. We're going to look at a supply schedule and a supply graph, and then we'll talk a little bit about elasticity of supply as well. So some key terms for you. Supply is the amount of goods available. So the law of supply would say that producers are going to be willing to offer more of a good as the price of that good increases. And as the price of that good falls, they're not going to want to sell as many of that good. Quantity supplied is the amount that a supplier is willing and able to supply at a given price. So if the price is $5 per slice of pizza, Spicy Pie is willing to supply 100 slices of pizza, right? A supply schedule then, just like a demand schedule, is that chart that lists out how much of a good a supplier would offer at the various price points. And then variable, kind of thinking about science or math, same sort of idea when it comes to supply and demand. A variable is a factor that can change. We'll look at a market supply schedule. So that shows all suppliers in a market. So instead of just Spicy Pie, maybe it's every pizza company in Fargo-Moorhead would be included in the market supply schedule. Supply curve is that graphical representation, and I'll show you an example of that as well. Then we have a market supply curve, which is going to be the graph of the quantity supplied for all suppliers in the market, and elasticity of supply. So a measure of the way in which quantity supplied reacts to a change in price. So a lot of those terms probably sound really familiar from chapter 4 with demand. Now we're just taking some of those very same principles and applying that to suppliers. So with demand, we were thinking from a consumer perspective, what would you and I do if we were shopping and price was up or price was down? Now we're thinking about what the business would do. So how does the law of supply affect the quantity supplied? The law of supply says that as prices rise, so will the quantity supplied. So it is a direct relationship. Price goes up, quantity supplied goes up. Thinking back to demand, price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. So we had an inverse relationship there. Law of supply, we have this positive relationship. So supply is the amount of goods that are available, and the law of supply includes two movements. One, individual firms changing their level of production. So Spicy Pie decides they're going to make 500 slices instead of 300 slices. In addition to measuring that, we can also increase or decrease supply when new firms enter or exit the market. So if someone opens a new coffee shop, we're going to have an increase in the supply of coffee. But if someone closes an existing coffee shop, we're going to have a decrease in supply. So again, just kind of showing this positive relationship. As price increases, so does quantity supplied. As price decreases, so does quantity supplied. So when it comes to production, if a firm is earning a profit from the sale of a good or a service, then an increase in the price of that good will in turn increase the firm's profits, right? If prices are high and goods are selling, of course the company is going to see an increase in their profit if they're selling pizza for $5 a slice instead of $1 a slice. In general, the search for profit really drives the choices that are made by a producer. So the goal for a producer, more often than not, is to profit. And so that drive for profit really explains the law of supply. So why do firms increase production when the price of a good goes up? Rising prices, number one, encourage new firms to join the market. So if you're like, oh my gosh, coffee is the hottest item in town, I want to get in on a slice of that industry, on a slice of that profit, then you may open a coffee shop, right? You are not going to open a coffee shop if coffee is just selling for really cheap and there's no opportunity in the market, right? But if there's opportunity and prices are high, supply increases. So take, for example, like the music market. When a particular type of music becomes popular, more bands are going to get into the music scene to play that type of music because they want to profit from the popularity of that type of music, right? So right now, like we have rap is really popular, pop is really popular, right? So on and so forth. And so there's a demand from consumers for a particular type of music. Like people really aren't, seeking out, at least the large majority of people aren't like seeking out screamo bands or like hard rock bands that were like more popular in the 70s and 80s, right? Pop is kind of the thing now, soft rock, so on and so forth. So we're going to see more artists producing music in those categories. And this action really, again, reflects the law of supply. They want to get into an industry that's popular. They don't want to be producing music that consumers aren't going to listen to. So supply of a good can be measured using a supply schedule. And the supply schedule is going to show the relationship between price and quantity supplied. So these supply schedules list how many slices of pizza one pizzeria can offer at different prices. So I've been picking on Spicy Pie. At $1 a slice, Spicy Pie is willing to supply 100 slices. At $2, 150, right? So we see that law of supply in action. As price goes up, so does Spicy Pie's willingness to supply that good. The market supply schedule then reflects that same phenomenon, but includes all of the pizzerias in the market. So that could be the FM area, that could be the Midwest, that could be as big as the country. Then we can take those points from the supply schedule and plot them to make a supply graph. Now, when we covered demand, we said demand is always going to be a negative slope because it's an inverse relationship. Supply is a positive relationship, so it's always going to have a positive slope. So the supply curve always rises from left to right because higher prices will lead to higher output. Just similarly, I guess, to demand, your two different variables that are going to be represented in a supply schedule are the price and then the output. Okay. For going back to our demand graph, we were looking at price and then quantity demanded. So elasticity of supply is based on that very same concept as elasticity of demand. It measures how firms will respond to a change in price. So if supply is elastic, that means supply is very sensitive to changes in price. Okay, and that happens when elasticity is greater than 1. When supply is inelastic, supply is not very responsive to a change in price. And so that's when elasticity is less than 1. So in the short run, it is really difficult for a firm to change their output level, right? Like if the popularity for pizza decreases overnight because maybe there's a sale on tacos in town, so people want less pizza, Spicy Pie isn't going to close. They aren't going to change their level of production, right? So in the short run, a firm doesn't change their output level. So supply is inelastic. So a better example maybe than pizza would be the agricultural industry. So if the price of soybeans just goes down the drain, that happened a couple of years ago, goes down the drain in the middle of a farming season when the soybeans have already been planted, a farmer can't change that anymore, right? They're not going to be able to react to that price change. They're just going to have to sell the soybeans for what they can sell them for. So in that short period of time, supply is inelastic because there's no changing the level of output. Now, next season, when next season rolls around, if the price of soybeans is still low, then a farmer may opt not to plant them. So then supply becomes more elastic in the long run. So really just like demand, supply becomes more elastic as the supplier has a longer time to respond to a change in price. So I'm not going to plant soybeans this year because the price is low and I didn't make any money on them last year, right? All right, a lot of information. Please let me know if you have questions, but that is an introduction to supply. Have a good rest of your day, guys.